Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. Funding issues, rising mine water levels and liquidation. These are some of the challenges that gold miner Pamodzi Gold is currently facing. With us in the studio today is Mining Weekly editor Martin Creamer, who will unpack the story so far. Martin, shares in Pamodzi have dropped dramatically since news of its liquidation broke. Can you give us a brief background on how it got to this point?
Yeah, I was there when they listed in late November 2006, and it was quite euphoric because here was going to be a black-owned company. The person leading it was Ndaba and Tseli, and backing him was Kobus de Plooy, who's well known for good structural finance expertise. And behind them was the Pamodzi Holdings, and that had tremendous success. It took over Food Corps, as we know, Simba Chips in the Food Corps stable, and developed that business very, very well. It also owned Nike South Africa, and in fact sponsored the Springboks at that stage. So it was quite euphoric, and this was going to be a strong new entrant that would be black-owned and continue to be black-owned. And it was fairly well funded to start with. I think the initial private placement, the share price was about 18.50 Rand. Of course, it's 50 cents today. So, that is the dramatic story. We've been used to in South Africa having gold companies very well capitalized. And this started off being well capitalized and was also very acquisitive. But one of the early signs of problems was the hedge that they inherited from the Canadians, Bima, when they bought their East Rand operations where Grootvlei mine is, which is now flooding. They started to acquire very fast because their strategy was that they could overcome this hedge by becoming bigger, because then they would be producing a lot more gold and the percentage that the hedge represented would be smaller and smaller. So they bought Orkney and they bought President Steyn. And both of these were mines that were going to be turned to good account, and they brought in Peter Steenkamp, who had been involved with Orkney for a long time. So there was a lot of confidence. But now, because of the lack of capitalization, they tried to raise money externally on foreign markets. And what they didn't realize was that they were in the middle of the worst global financial meltdown since the 30s. And they got caught right in that. And they are now undercapitalized to a point where they can hardly pay to keep the water levels down at Grootvlei, which are rising quite dangerously.
And now we've also heard that the sheriff of the court is seizing gold from Pamodzi. What's that story?
You see, that's a second story within the main story of their liquidation. We know that Orkney mines have been provisionally liquidated. But what is less known is that smaller companies are also bringing court cases against Pamodzi that don't really make the headlines. And one of those involved a security company that's been working for Pamodzi for some time and was owed 11 million Rand. And in order to get this 11 million Rand, they engaged in some very unorthodox activity. And we learnt that last week on Friday, when the helicopter from Rand Refinery arrived to pick up the gold concentrate and take it across to, it was more than gold concentrate, it was gold amalgam, to take it across to Rand Refinery for refining, other court implications took place, and the sheriff arrived from the Springs area and said, "Oh no, you don't. We are now seizing this bar of gold," which they proceeded to do. So the side shows here are growing more and more serious for Pamodzi.
Sounds more like fiction than truth. What do you think the far-reaching consequences would be if Pamodzi went under, especially for towns like Orkney?
In Orkney, they employ 3,000 people. The normal rule of thumb is that you multiply that by 10 to sort of assess how many people will be directly affected by this mine closure. In other words, employees and their direct dependents. But there's a bigger story because there's so much business spin-off. So we would say 30,000 people would be directly affected immediately. When we spoke to Jan van den Berg yesterday of the company that has been the employment broker and has 1,000 people working there, he said there's a human tragedy actually being rolled out there where he's got loyal people who work for him who haven't been paid for 2 months. And he says some of them are so loyal that even though they're not being paid, they are quite prepared to go underground so that they can keep their jobs and show their faithfulness. And he said, but they can't send these people underground because they are so undernourished that they could perish underground. That is the way things are unfolding socially, so it's quite serious.
It's a tragedy. Where do you think they'll go from here?
Well, there's a two-track effort at the moment. At the high level, you get Ndaba and Tseli and Kobus Deploy, who the original movers and shakers in this. They trying to raise long-term finance. They flew to New York, they flew to London, they flew to Dubai. On their return, Ndaba said, I think we've saved the company. But, it takes a long time now to rearrange finance. They have turned off their cell phones, so you can't get to them. They're sitting and negotiating long-term finance. Now, negotiating long-term finance in this climate is very, very difficult. And the possibility is, they will have to give over much more than they would in terms of shares to get this finance. That's the one possibility. So on that track, the original founders are working flat out to try and raise capital. But already, we've had a successful provisional liquidation. So Orkney Mines, which is a very important part of the operations and which can contribute, profit-wise, they have been plunged into provisional liquidation. And leading the charge there now is Enver Motala. But fortunately, Enver has assessed the situation and realized these mines should not go into liquidation. I mean, he's an experienced liquidator. And he has immediately assessed the situation and said, this is not a candidate for liquidation. It can make money, especially at this gold price. So he rushed back to the court after he had won a provisional liquidation order last Friday. He ran back to the court on Monday and he said, this is a special circumstance, 30,000 people directly involved, a lot of business spin-offs there. Please, judge, give me wider powers. I don't want to go there and liquidate this. I want to go there and resuscitate this. So give me the power to trade the gold. Give me the power to pay the salaries. And the judge said, you've got it. So he rushed back there. The three liquidators who've been appointed, it's also Alan Pello from West Trust and Dion Boerta from Pretoria. They've each got areas of expertise. And their determination now is to turn this around. And one of the things they're doing is talking to Anglo Gold, because Anglo Gold is under 98 million because they did the processing of the gold. And so they've gone across to Anglo and said, look, it's in your interest to keep this going. Can you underwrite what we want to do here? And Anglo Gold initially walked away, but late yesterday, it seemed that they were prepared to put in an initial 10 million rand to pay wages. That has been unconfirmed, but what is being sought from them is about 20 million rand just to keep things ticking over. Wages are the most important thing.
Thank you so much for your insight, Martin.
It's a great pleasure.
That's the show for today. Join us again next time as we take an in-depth look into the mining world's premier projects, industries, and business personalities.